Think about the concept of a time capsule for a second.
Right, like burying a box in the dirt.
Exactly. You fill it with old newspapers, maybe some photos, and you bury it, fully intending for someone to open it 50 years later. It's, this intentional bridge between eras.
Yeah, but what happens when the Earth is holding on to something it was never really meant to give back?
Right. What if the capsule isn't a box of cherished memories, but a shallow grave designed to erase two lives completely? Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening to this, you are probably the kind of person who constantly asks why and how. You're a learner.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the grisly discovery.
Yeah, we have to go back to the analog world. January 14th, 1953, in Stanley Park.
Right, which for anyone unfamiliar is this massive 1,000-acre expanse of really dense forest right in the middle of Vancouver.
Exactly. And a groundskeeper named Albert Tong was just out there doing his daily routine clearing brush near Beaver Lake.
Just a normal Wednesday for him.
Right. And as he's walking, he steps on something under the wet leaves, and he feels this distinct crunch under his boot.
Oh, that is just chilling.
It really is. He clears the brush away, probably expecting a branch, and finds a small human skull.
And when the police arrive, what they uncover is just so deliberate.
Yeah, beneath the tree roots, they found two small skeletons, and they had been laid out head to foot in a perfectly straight line. So it wasn't hasty, it was intentional.
Highly intentional. They had been hidden there for years.
Mm-hmm.
And the inventory of items found alongside them is, well, it paints a very specific, almost domestic picture.
Yeah, going through the old police logs, the details are just haunting. They found a woman's fur coat covering the bodies, right?
Right, specifically a size 16 coat made from rabbit and mutton fur. And near the bodies, they found the murder weapon, which was a roofer's or lather's hatchet with a broken handle.
And there was an aviator flying helmet still strapped to one of the skulls.
Yeah. Along with a blue tin lunchbox, 2 pairs of Oxford shoes with white rubber soles, and, strangely, a single woman-size 5.5 shoe left at the scene.
Just one shoe.
Just one. And based on the decomposition, investigators figured the bodies had been there since roughly 1947.
Okay, what I want to focus on is how the investigators in 1953 interpreted that specific pile of evidence. Because, it seems like their initial theories sent the entire case completely off the rails from day one.
What's fascinating here is how the entire trajectory of the investigation was shaped by the societal biases of the 1950s.
How so?
Well, the medical examiner looked at the remains and just concluded they belonged to a boy and a girl.
It's just based on a visual check?
Pretty much. And then investigators looked at the trauma to the skulls and noted that the hatchet blows were relatively light. They lacked sheer brute force.
Okay.
So following the logic of the time, police deduced that a woman must have swung the hatchet.
Wait, really? Because the swing was light. That seems like an incredibly flimsy way to assume the gender of a killer. Was there any actual physical evidence pointing to a woman, or was this just a sociological profile?
It was almost entirely profiling. Vancouver post-World War II was experiencing a very specific socioeconomic strain. Returning soldiers were taking back jobs, displacing women from the workforce.
So there was a lot of extreme poverty, especially for single mothers.
Exactly. So the police constructed a narrative that fit that climate. They assumed a desperate, impoverished single mother brought her son and daughter into the woods because she couldn't afford to feed them.
Wow.
Yeah, the theory was she used a cheap hatchet, covered them with her size 16 coat, lost her shoe in a panic, and then likely jumped off the nearby Lionsgate Bridge.
That is just such a dangerous way to run an investigation. It's like wearing blinders. By deciding exactly who they were looking for, a mother with a missing boy and a missing girl, they basically built a filter that ignored any evidence that didn't fit that story.
Oh, totally. And the consequences were severe. For decades, they chased down 41 different cases of missing boy-girl siblings all across North America and Europe.
And every single one was a dead end.
Every single one. Eventually, the case just went dormant. The bones were literally sitting in cardboard boxes in a basement.
And weren't they even put on display at the Vancouver Police Museum?
Yeah, as a morbid curiosity, it's wild to think about now. But that brings us to 1997, when a maverick detective named Brian Honeyborn steps in.
Right, because he had grown up with this story haunting the local news.
Exactly. And now he's a detective with daughters of his own, and he felt this deep protectiveness over these remains being gawked at. So he takes matters into his own hand.
Without formal permission, right?
Without permission. He removes the remains, has them cremated, and scatters the ashes at sea in English Bay.
Which, on a human level, is a beautiful gesture of dignity. But from a forensic standpoint, I mean, that's like setting your only case file on fire.
Oh, absolutely.
If you incinerate the remains, the heat destroys the DNA. He was literally obliterating the evidence.
He would have, but he made one crucial, forward-thinking decision just before the cremation.
Right. He saved a tooth and a few small bone fragments from each child.
Yeah, he personally hand-delivered those fragments to the forensic dentistry experts at the University of British Columbia for testing.
Why a tooth, though? Like, what makes dental remains so resilient?
It comes down to biology. Teeth are protected by enamel, which is the hardest substance in the human body. It creates this hermetic seal around the inner pulp chamber.
So it protects the DNA from moisture and bacteria in the soil.
Exactly. And when the UBC experts extracted the DNA from that pulp, the results shattered 40 years of established police doctrine.
They weren't a boy and a girl.
No, the DNA proved conclusively that they were both boys, half-brothers who shared the same mother.
That is insane. I mean, it's like spending 45 years trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle, only to realize you've been looking at the picture on the wrong box.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Think about all those witness tips from the 1950s about two missing boys that the police just threw in the trash because they were so certain they needed a girl. The actual leads were right there.
It really shows how forensic science forces us to question our foundational assumptions. Humans see the patterns we expect to see, but DNA is completely indifferent to our narratives. It just presents the biological reality.
But even with that twist, in 1998, knowing they were two boys didn't give them a name. The technology just wasn't there yet to match that profile without a suspect.
Right, so the case goes cold again for another 2 decades, until the genetic genealogy revolution around 2021.
And this is where the Vancouver police hire Redgrave Research Forensic Services, setting off this incredible scientific relay race.
It really was a relay race. Lakehead University's Paleo DNA lab received these tiny, decades-old bone fragments.
How do they even get the DNA out of something that old and degraded?
It's a delicate process called demineralization. They use a chemical wash to slowly dissolve the hard outer matrix of the bone to reach the microscopic cells inside.
And the sources note that their first attempt actually failed because the DNA was just too shattered.
Yeah, they had to go back and use a larger piece of the older boy's cranium to finally extract enough intact nuclear DNA. And once they had that, they shipped it to Hudson Alpha.
Right, the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, to sequence the whole genome.
Exactly. And then that raw data goes to Sabre Investigations for the bioinformatics, formatting the genetic code so it can be uploaded into GED Match.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because while all this high-level science is happening, there is this completely separate, deeply human family story unfolding.
Yeah, the parallel track.
Right. Meanwhile, we have a 26-year-old woman named Allie Brady. She's sitting with her grandmother, Diane, just looking at an old family photo album. And Allie spots a picture of two great-uncles she never knew existed.
One with blonde hair, the other with darker features.
Exactly. And when she asks about them, Diane gets super evasive. She says, you know, we don't talk about that.
Which is the fastest way to make someone start digging into family history.
Right. Total red flag. So Allie and her mom, Cindy, find out these were Diane's younger brothers. The family lore was that their mother was too poor to care for them, so social services took them away.
They honestly hope to find them alive and well.
Yeah, so Allie and Cindy take 23andMe and My Heritage Test to track them down, and then true crime podcaster Eve Lazarus actually connects Allie to the police.
The scientific track and the human track finally collide.
They compare the DNA, and it is a 100% match. After almost 70 years, the babes in the woods finally have names. 7-year-old Derek Dalton and 6-year-old David Dalton.
Who are also known by the surname Bousquet. It was just a monumental triumph for forensic genealogy.
But, and this is big, but identifying the victims is not the same as solving the crime.
No, it's not. It just opens a new door. The Vancouver police publicly theorized that the boy's mother, Eileen Bousquet, was the likely killer.
Relying on that original 1953 theory about the woman's coat.
Right.
But when you actually look at the sources and the physical evidence, that official theory makes zero sense. The family actively disputes it, and honestly, the crime scene inventory backs them up.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about that coat.
Yeah, it was a size 16, which means it belonged to a relatively stocky individual. But Eileen Bousquet was petite. She was 5'1" and wore a size 2.
The physical discrepancy is massive.
How do you reconcile a woman hiking into the woods to commit a murder while wearing a heavy winter coat that is literally 5 or 6 sizes too big for her?
You really can't. And the family insists Eileen was this gentle person, an animal lover who constantly babysat other kids in the neighborhood.
Right, the behavioral profile just does not fit a brutal hatchet murder.
It doesn't. The family genuinely believed the social services story, even though police have never found a single record of those boys being placed in government care.
Which leaves the whole thing in this incredibly murky territory. We know who the victims are, but the killer is probably going to remain a ghost. And having a solved identity but an unsolved murder creates a really difficult ethical dilemma, especially for museums.
Yeah, let's talk about Sasha Natiuk, the curator at the Vancouver Police Museum.
Right, she oversees the physical exhibit. So, what does this all mean for how we consume this kind of media?
Well, Natiuk struggles with what the museum industry calls difficult collections. Once the boys were identified, the museum saw a massive surge in attendance. People were flocking to see the crime scene artifacts.
Because it was suddenly in the news again.
Exactly. So Natiuk made a definitive choice and banned any photography of the Babes in the Woods exhibit.
To prevent people from sensationalizing a violent murder.
Right. Putting a murder weapon on display inherently risks turning a tragedy into entertainment. She wanted to force visitors to be present with the solemn reality of these artifacts rather than just snapping a photo for social media.
It's a fine line between educational history and exploitative true crime.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Babes in the Woods case isn't just an isolated anomaly. It's part of a massive shift in criminal justice.
Powered by past investigators preserving evidence, right?
Exactly. None of this happens if police in the past didn't meticulously save things they didn't even have the technology to analyze yet.
That reminds me of the Susan Galvin case from the source material. This was 1967 in Seattle. Susan was a 20-year-old police records clerk who was found suffocated in a parking garage elevator.
Right, and for 50 years, the main suspect was a man who literally went by the name Punchy the Clown.
Yeah, he had been seen talking with her hours before she died, but they could never definitively place him at the scene.
So the case just gathered dust. But the original crime scene technicians in 1967 had carefully collected and stored Susan's clothing in a climate-controlled environment.
Which was incredibly forward-thinking.
It was. So when Detective Rolf Norton reopened the case in 2019, he sent the degraded genetic material from that clothing to C.C. Moore at Parabon Nanolabs.
And C.C. Moore is essentially a pioneer in forensic genetic genealogy.
She is. And her process is different because standard DNA testing looks for a direct one-to-one match in a police database. If the killer was never arrested, standard DNA is useless.
Right. So what did she do differently?
She used DNA phenotyping to build an ancestral profile. She extracted the killer's DNA and found a really unique genetic signature. The suspect was approximately 16% Native American, and the rest was primarily of Polish descent.
Wow. That is a very specific demographic mix.
A needle in a haystack. By tracing those distinct ancestral lines through commercial databases finding distant cousins, she completely exonerated Punchy the Clown.
And found the real killer.
Yeah, a man named Frank Whippet, who had actually passed away in 1987.
It's just wild. But, this reliance on persistent evidence isn't always about high-tech DNA labs. Sometimes it's literally just a piece of paper, like the Eldon Jacobs and Marilyn Merman case from 1980.
The Vancouver rooming house murders. That crime scene was incredibly bizarre.
It really was. Eldon was stabbed 40 times, and the killer smashed a birdcage, covering his body in feathers. And upstairs, Marilyn was murdered and deliberately posed like a model in a magazine.
A scene with that much chaos usually leaves a significant physical footprint.
Right. And they found Eldon's stolen van abandoned miles away. Inside the van was the bloody murder weapon, and sitting right next to it was a single glass pop bottle.
A literal smoking gun, essentially.
Exactly. A detective named Verjo Makita lifted a perfect latent print off that bottle. But in 1980, checking fingerprints meant manually flipping through physical cards.
Which takes forever.
Yeah.
And they found no match.
No match. The case completely stalled. But Stuart Makita kept a physical photocopy of that pop bottle fingerprint pinned to his desk for 20 years.
Which is such a crucial physical tether to the case.
Yeah. It kept the victims from just being swallowed up by a cold case filing cabinet. So when Stuart Wayne Cope eventually took over the Unsolved Homicide Unit, he ran that saved fingerprint through the newly modernized, digitized database.
And they got a hit.
Within moments, Lloyd James DeWend. And get this, he had a documented history of severe animal cruelty.
Which instantly explains the bird feathers at the crime scene.
Exactly. But an old fingerprint on a pop bottle inside a stolen vehicle is circumstantial. It proves he was in the van, But it doesn't prove he wielded the knife in the rooming house 20 years ago.
Right. For a cold case like that, you usually need a confession.
This is where law enforcement used this elaborate undercover strategy called a Mr. Big operation. It cost the department $120,000 to pull off.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. Can you explain how a Mr. Big sting actually works?
It relies on total psychological immersion. Undercover officers spend months slowly befriending the suspect. They buy them drinks, pay for meals, and gradually introduce them to a fake, highly lucrative criminal syndicate.
Okay.
Once the suspect feels dependent on this new lifestyle, the undercover officers invent a crisis. They tell the suspect they're about to meet the boss, Mr. Big.
And they tell him Mr. Big has police connections, right?
Exactly. They say, look, the boss knows the cops are looking at you for an old double murder. He demands loyalty. You have to tell him exactly what happened so our fixers can clean up the evidence or you're out of the organization.
That is wild. They basically leverage his greed to make him brag about the crime. And it works. Deland walks into a hotel room and gives Mr. Big a detailed confession, completely unaware the room is wired with hidden cameras.
Now, it is a controversial tactic. Defense attorneys argue it borders on coercion.
Because they're promising wealth and protection?
Right. But the courts often uphold it because the suspect inevitably volunteers specific unreleased details about the crime scene that only the true killer would know.
That makes sense.
But the real takeaway here is that none of this, the undercover sting, the database match, the conviction, none of it is possible if Sestjeet Mikita throws away that fingerprint in 1985.
It is a profound legacy of patience. Identifying Frank Whippet doesn't happen if they don't store Susan Galvin's clothing in 1967. And identifying Derek and David Dalton is absolutely impossible if Detective Honeyborn doesn't save a single tooth in 1997.
It creates this invisible chain of custody stretching across decades. Investigators having the foresight to say, I don't have the tools to solve this today, but maybe the next generation will.
Which brings us right back to Derek and David. Their story is undeniably tragic. Because so much time has passed, we may never know with absolute certainty who swung that hatchet.
They might never get traditional justice.
No. But what this blend of 1950s evidence collection and 2020's genetic science accomplished is that it gave them their names back. It restored their dignity.
Yeah.
So the next time you hear a news report about a cold case finally being solved, just remember the invisible thread connecting it all. A 1950s park groundskeeper, a modern genealogist, and a young woman named Allie simply swabbing her cheek for an ancestry kit.
Every single action was absolutely necessary to bring those boys out of the woods.
It really leaves you with a staggering final thought to mull over. Right now, millions of people around the world are voluntarily uploading their DNA to commercial databases just to find out, what region of Europe their ancestors came from.
Yeah, just for fun.
Right. But by doing that, are we actively witnessing the extinction of the cold case? In a world where a discarded pop bottle or a microscopic bone fragment can trace a criminal through their fourth cousin, does the concept of getting away with the perfect crime even exist anymore?
It forces us to redefine what it means to leave a trace. The shadows where secrets used to hide are just being systematically illuminated.
It perfectly mirrors that time capsule we talked about at the very beginning. You can try to bury the past deep in the dirt. You can hide it under tree roots, false names, and decades of silence. But the Earth has officially stopped keeping our secrets. Eventually, the capsule gets opened. Thanks for diving deep with us today.